Let's see. What am I going to do today? Make pancakes, procrastinate jogging, don't actually jog. What do you mean they're trading George Pickens?
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you a daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is an emergency podcast episode because now sources have rained in from everywhere that the Steelers are indeed trading George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys for a third-round pick and pick swaps. We're going to break down all the initial elements of this. We'll be talking more about this on the full episode that comes out later, but this is the emergency version of this podcast. We had a nice full episode up for Wednesday. Forget all about that. That's out the window. It's a great conversation and debate with Dave Damashek. But now it's time. We got to talk about George Pickens being gone. And I got to say, I have been on board with a lot of the Steelers' plans this offseason. Getting a defensive tackle, investing in the defense, trading for DK Metcalf. I thought that they had it lined up. But RIP, weapons of mass destruction, because George Pickens, as now, according to all reports, is headed to the Dallas Cowboys for a third-round pick and then other pick swaps to be detailed in a bit. I have to say I am not on board with this plan. Not because I think George Pickens by himself is like the future of the franchise that was going to define everything, but because I saw the understanding of pairing him with DK Metcalf with the current balance of the Steelers offense, was saying, hey, we'll ride this out for a year. And especially if you got a second-round pick back. But when you're fairly certain, when you look at that guy's talent and you know that next year he's going to get you a third-round pick anyways, granted, it'll be a later third-round pick. It'll be a third-round comp pick. I thought it made a whole lot more sense to keep that guy in the fold, get one more year out of him. And now with DK Metcalf next to him, with all respect to Deontay Johnson and how good he was when he was in the Steelers before he has fallen off, as far as he's fallen off, he was going to have the best pairing of a wide receiver he's had in his career with DK Metcalf next to him. And with the potential of the offensive line in the run game, you could see George Pickens being more dangerous in an offense that didn't solely depend on him the way that last year's offense several times did. But now Omar Khan's moving George Pickens. And again, it's not just the move of George Pickens. It's the fact that it took until this stage to get it done. And that the Steelers did not draft a wide receiver in the NFL draft. Because if you knew that this was a likelihood of happening, I assumed when I was looking at the Steelers, okay, I heard the rumors early on in the draft process, and then they cooled down. According to Diana Rossini of The Athletic, this was the Cowboys were offering a fourth-round pick, and now the Steelers have made them come up to a third, and that was the Steelers' price. And maybe that's the simple move here. It's just that the Steelers were looking at getting at least a third-round pick for him. This is similar to other times they've got compensation. It's better compensation than they got for the San Antonio Holmes trade back in the day. It's, we'll see if it's actually better compensation than what they got for Antonio Brown when they traded him away. The Steelers have done this before, and maybe that's the bottom line here. Maybe they don't see George Pickens as part of the long-term plan because of the off-the-field things and the crash outs and things like that. But it made a whole lot more sense for the Steelers to do this before the draft, to get, if you were going to get a third-round pick, get that third-round pick before the draft and be able to use that to say, hey, let's go get Alec Ayamanar from Stanford. Let's go get Kyle Williams from Washington State. Let's go get somebody. And even if it wasn't the third-round pick that you used it on, if you used it in the fifth round, if you used it in the sixth round, you at least got another receiver into the fold. Because now you're going to the place where you're saying DK Metcalf is wide receiver one, and then you're hoping Calvin Austin or Robert Woods or Roman Wilson turn into wide receiver two. Or, and this is the possibility, they do sign one of the available free agents out there. Guys like Amani Cooper are still available. Guys like Tyler Boyd are still available. But again, it would have made more sense to do this and try to get this compensation in the draft. Now, again, maybe this goes to the overall plan that the Steelers are just saving up a boatload of picks for next year's draft class, because now you're going to have all your natural 7 picks and then your 4 comp picks that you're slotted to have for next season, and an extra 3rd round pick. So at this stage in time, I think the Steelers could be projected to have 12 draft picks. And maybe that goes into the whole plan that they are definitely getting their quarterback next year. But man, it made a whole lot more sense to try to have a 1-2 receiver punch that would be dangerous, and maybe one of the most dangerous in the NFL, than it would be to trade that away for just a 3rd round pick, when you're probably going to get a 3rd round pick in 2027's time, because that's what that comp pick would be. But it made more sense to do that, either make this trade before the draft, where you could use that compensation to replenish your wide receiver room, or get more than this 3rd round pick than they're getting. I have to say I'm not on board with this trade. Now, where I could be is if the Steelers have a plan to get another wide receiver temporarily, and if there is truly a stage behind the scenes that the Steelers had reached with George Pickens, where they found him untenable, where he was just like, they were just like, you know what, this is not going to work anymore. And maybe that's part of the story here. And this is part of the things that we don't have. We haven't been in the facility since the draft. And we haven't seen any of the vets since the end of the season. So maybe that's part of what's going on here. But several things that are happening right now make me question, what is the Steelers' true plan moving forward with how they want to operate this offense? What wants to be the emphasis of the team? We get that they want to run the football, but having that 1-2 punch at wide receiver that was truly dangerous would have made it easy on Mason Rudolph and or Aaron Rodgers to conduct the offense and to say, hey, there's 2 dangerous guys on the outside. You got to pay attention to them at all times. Now you kind of put yourself back in the position where you were going into last season. And again, they could sign somebody. But man, major questions for how Omar Khan is handling things here in Pittsburgh. We're going to keep it going here. We're going to take a quick break. Stick with us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. This is your emergency podcast episode on the trading of George Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, it's your emergency episode on the trading of George Pickens. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Again, I had a nice morning lined up. I was going to not jog again and pretend like I said I would jog. But here we are recording at 8:15 in the morning, trying to get this episode done so we can get it out to you all and get you my initial thoughts. Now, we are going to do a full episode later. We have Josh Taylor slated to come on for tomorrow's full episode. So we will have lots of thoughts there where we get to flesh things out, learn more about what were the details of this trade. So let me address some things that are probably being called into our Locked On Steelers call-in line. By the way, you can call into the call-in line at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute, and we will try to get your question on the show. But let's get into one of the big questions. I think, does this impact what could be happening with Aaron Rodgers? Now, I don't think it does from the Steelers' perspective. I think they're probably like, Aaron, we were trying to trade this guy before the draft. It didn't work out. This is what it was. I don't think it changed their plan. They're like, hey, Aaron, still come in if you want to come in. If you don't, we got Mason Rudolph. But does it change Aaron Rodgers' outlook on the Steelers? Maybe not. Maybe he thinks he's on board because he did work out with DK Metcalf and not George Pickens, during this break that we've seen where he hasn't been with the Jets and he hasn't been with the Steelers, and he's been going on Pat McAfee and saying whether or not what he's going through. He was at the Kentucky Derby this weekend. Maybe, I don't know. But to me, this move does bring that into question to say, does that impact Aaron Rodgers' situation? I can't say that it does or it doesn't. So I'm not going to pretend like I know that for a second, but it does make me wonder where does that factor into this? So I'm going to be honest with you. That's an I don't know situation. I'm not going to try to give y'all a fake take here of like, it definitely does or definitely doesn't. So that is something to ponder that is going to be out there until that man signs. But I think the biggest question is, what is the plan for this passing attack moving forward? Now, granted, they have Pat Freiermuth under contract. They have DK Metcalf under contract. They've got the O-line that they've been drafting for the past two years. They've got this running back room with Jalen Warren and Caleb Johnson, and that's exciting. And we said, well, hey, with George Pickens and DK Metcalf, made for an offense that you could see being dynamic at several parts of the field. The only reason you give that up, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this is just me putting on my hat of understanding how they operate, is they saw this situation with George Pickens being untenable. And again, if it was me, I would have found a way to get this done before the draft. But hey, maybe this was the pressure that they needed to put on the Cowboys to get this third-round pick so they could get the value that they wanted back. I still think they should have pushed for a second. Just me. But who knows? We still got to see these other swap picks, here, because Adam Schefter from ESPN said there's a swapping of later picks involved. Maybe they're switching up places for a 6th for a 5th or a 7th for a 6th, and maybe some of these 12 picks that they'll have for the 2026 NFL draft will be a bit higher, helping their ammunition a little bit further as far as where they want to trade up and what they want to do in next year's draft. But man, if you're trading away George Pickens, one, I think it does dispel the one thing I think it does say is that the Steelers are not trying to win right now. Like this, they're not. I've seen some people say, "Oh, they're trying to win right now by going to get Aaron Rodgers." As I was saying before, Aaron Rodgers is a bridge to get them to next year, and I think this further solidifies this is a bridge year, because you don't trade away a guy like George Pickens if you're trying to win right now. Which clearly the Cowboys are if they're going to get him, because now George Pickens is going to be with CeeDee Lamb, he's going to be with Dak Prescott, he's going to be with Michael Parsons. Now the Cowboys, granted, I don't know if this does make them better, because the Cowboys are run by Jerry Jones, and he's been Jerry Jones in it for quite some time, and the Cowboys have been falling on themselves for the last 50, 40 years. It's been a minute since the Cowboys of the 90s was the story of that franchise, but. If the Cowboys are getting George Pickens, okay, you see the plan for that offense. They're trying to win right now. It's obvious the Steelers, they're still building to get to some place there. So maybe that's part of the equation here. And again, maybe there's some untenable situations. Maybe George Pickens wants to be traded. Maybe George Pickens, is saying, has been in a situation where the Steelers, they're like, hey, we're going to make nice with this man, but we need to get him out of the organization. Which, hey, Mike DeFable's been on this show and said for a while, he's told us, he's like, hey, there's no way that they offer him an extension. I've been of the opinion it would make sense to offer him an extension if you're not paying a quarterback, and you can find a way to make it work with him and DK Metcalf so that you can have that 1-2 punch at wide receiver that could be truly dangerous. But I mean, hey, the Steelers have been selling a lot of people on this. Shedeur Sanders, who, I mean, granted, maybe this is another sign about how this has played out. Shedeur Sanders was going on national talk shows being asked who's the top quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And he said on his talk show, whoever has DK Metcalf and George Pickens. Now, obviously, that's Shedeur Sanders kind of, making a play at maybe he could be one of the top quarterbacks if his wide receivers were, were George Pickens and DK Metcalf. Who knows? But to me, this does show the Steelers, their plan is more about beyond this year. Their plan is their plan is involving trying to keep building towards next year. And their plan was, once they traded for DK Metcalf, George Pickens was on the chopping block. And we said that immediately. We had episodes back then like, oh, what does this mean for George Pickens? And I did hear rumblings, but I heard that once they got to a certain part of the draft, they were content with keeping George. And maybe it was just that the Cowboys and no one else was offering that third round pick that they wanted. And now that they've got it, that was their asking price moving forward. Big questions for the Steelers, in my opinion, and Omar Khan and how they're handling this right now. And how they gonna mess up my Wednesday morning, man? I was sitting here, I was chilly mo. I had a nice interview with DJ Thomas Jones lined up for the North Shore Drive podcast in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Go check that out. If we hope that it's up, actually, because he has a wonderful story about how he sacrificed for his mom and all this stuff that I encourage you. I at least wrote an article about it, so go read that. But all of that is like, whoop, that's out the way. I'm sorry, like, it's all respect to him. this is now the story of the Pittsburgh Steelers for this Wednesday, and we got to address this, and we will continue to address this here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stay tuned. We'll have a full episode up with Josh Taylor. We scheduled him to record this afternoon. I was going to talk to him about other coaching stuff because Josh Taylor's been a whiz at understanding the paths of coaching and where things have gone. Now it's going to be about George Pickens and what this offense is really going to be about. So we'll get to that more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. This has been your emergency episode here of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here every day, Monday through Friday, on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We will keep you up to date with all the other crazy Steelers moves. Who knows? Maybe Aaron Rodgers will sign today. Who knows? Because the Steelers clearly like doing this stuff when I'm trying to just get other things done. But hey, we'll keep it here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.